the then town council president and now chair of the Rhode Island Republican Party, Stu Cienki, those two uncovered this scandal. And we're going to learn how this all started in East Greenwich. Then, of course, it's our Thursday, our final half hour. At the bottom of the hour, we'll have Dr. Andrew Bostom. Again, he, every time there's one of these COVID press conferences in Rhode Island, I get the phone call from Dr. Boston saying, it's just crazy what I'm hearing from Dr. Scott and from others. So he's got a lot to say. He's going to tell us why the data does not support what the Department of Health and Dr. Scott were telling us today. And we're going to talk more about should 12 to 15-year-olds be getting vaccines, what's the pros and cons, and the new CDC mask guidance that came out today. Okay, so first a little batting practice before we get into the main, and that means time for me to put on my cap. And again, I go with my once-a-week Harvard cap. Just as an aside here, I want to show you something that, it's not just economic and other policy that we get involved with, or that I get involved with all the time. So I want to show you a little email I sent out today on an issue that we don't cover a lot on this show, but I'd like you to see it. And if I can just get my screen right, I'll show it to you. All right, I'm gonna share this image with you right now. Okay, so this is an email that I sent to a committee today. I think it's House Finance Committee. I don't know why Finance Committee is hearing a bill on abortions. Well, I guess I do know why, because this bill today would authorize your money, our money, my money, public funds to pay for abortions through Medicaid, and by requiring coverage of abortions in any government employee union health insurance plan. So this is the email I sent right before to the House Bill 5787. We don't talk much about, religious stuff and abortion stuff, but I am a Catholic and I am opposed and I am just appalled at the idea that my money could be used to pay for abortions, something that's so objectionable to me. So anyway, that's just a little something I wanted to share with you. Also, I'm going to share another photo. Boy, I'm getting very clumsy. I don't know what's my computer is very slow today. But here's another something in Rhode Island, just came out this week. So once again, Rhode Island's in the bottom 10 in a very important national ranking. The Rich States or Poor States annual report done by our friends Stephen Moore with the Heritage Foundation, Jonathan Williams at ALEC, the American Legislative Exchange Council. And this just looks like economic performance. And again, if you say rich state or poor state, well, Rhode Island's a poor state. The bottom 10, 41st overall. And then here are some of the subcategories. Here's where we rank. And I ask you, is there anything from what you've seen from this legislature, from this Speaker of the House, from this Senate President, and from this new governor, is there anything that might improve any of these categories? They just don't care. They just don't care. And again, we talked about it yesterday. Why? Because the main reason is that they're looking to take care of their special interest friends, because it's their special interest friends who will get them reelected. They don't care about you or me. They don't care about the overall economy. It's a price to pay for them staying in power. And when we talk today, about both our guests, when we talk with Gayle Corrigan in a few minutes about this firefighter overtime abuse, Again, special interests dominating everything in this state. When we talk about the misinformation you're getting from our own government and from the federal CDC, purposely misinforming you because they want to keep more power and control over you. They want to scare you. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And then you have a media a compliant media that just doesn't ask any challenging questions. No headlines. I mean, you always see the headlines, hospitalizations went up by 15, but they're down by 50 now. And there's no headline, hospitalizations down in Rhode Island. That's good. You don't see it. You listen to those questions at the press conference today. I mean, the softballs they throw at them, it's unbelievable. There's only one or two people there. Maybe John DePietro, maybe Pat Ford. And that's it. And they're not mainstream. They're not mainstream media. It's just unbelievable what's going on. All right, let's talk a little bit about deja vu all over again. I mean, my goodness. Wasn't it in 1979 that we saw record federal taxation, federal spending, federal deficits under Jimmy Carter? Well, we're seeing that again now under Joe Biden. Wasn't it in 1979 under Jimmy Carter that we had fuel shortages and long gas lines, illegal immigration a big problem? Well, we're seeing that again under Joe Biden. Wasn't it under 79 under Jimmy Carter, where we had basically record inflation? Remember the misery index? Any of you old enough to remember the misery index? I know you young guys don't remember that. That was something, I don't know who made it up or who created it, but it was the unemployment rate plus the inflation rate. I don't remember what the unemployment rate was or the inflation rate at the time, but the misery index was well into the high teens, if not low 20s. I think we had inflation rates of 6, 7, 8%, and we had unemployment rate 8, 9, 10%. Well, unemployment rate is not as low as it should be in this country because of Biden's incentives to keep people at home. And we just saw yesterday, inflation rate came out higher than anyone expected, 4.2%. Not necessarily high historically, going back to 1979 levels, but certainly high for the last few decades, and certainly much higher than it was, under President Trump or President Obama, I even think. Wasn't it in 1979 that we saw massive Middle East problems under Jimmy Carter? The Iran hostage situation, all kinds of tensions and hijackings and whatever else was going on. Well, we're seeing it again. Israel's under attack from Hamas. Trump was doing peace agreements. Under Joe Biden, we have attacks. Under we have Iran acting up again, sending their boats to harass our Navy. And then outside of the Middle East, China and Russia are testing Joe Biden. As far as I can tell, he's not responding. He's failing on every front. And why? Because just like in 1979, here in 2021, Jimmy Carter then, Joe Biden now, you have presidents that project weakness. And they think that by being a nice guy, that these bad actors, Joe's a nice guy, Jimmy's a nice guy, we'll behave. Yeah, we'll behave. It doesn't work that way. These are bad actors. They're looking for any and every opportunity they can to advance their agenda, at our expense, of course. Then you look at Dan McKee, and and I'm going to change gears a little, but like Joe Biden, I hope that when they took their oaths of office, that they would be the moderates we were told they were. But in both cases, I'm severely disappointed. Obviously, Joe Biden speaks for himself with his energy policies. Same thing with Dan McKee. He signed the Act on Climate. He's publicly supporting this TCI gas tax. the fatal flaw, and this is the liberal progressive flaw, and this is the sad thing, is that both Biden and McKee think that it's government money, federal handouts, state handouts, that make an economy go. We heard it from Governor McKee today. You know, when talking, he was talking about how foolish he thought it was for some of these other states to end the federal handouts or the federal subsidies for unemployment or the extra incentives, $300 a week for unemployment, and said he would never do that in Rhode Island because the Rhode Island economy needs that federal stimulus. Wrong. You see, why not just pay everybody $1 million a year? I mean, it can't work. It can't work. It can't work. It's the same thing. You know, we've heard him say it. You know, Dan McKee's supposed to be the voice of small businesses. All he's done is pile more mandates, energy mandates. You know, wage mandates are coming, minimum wage, pay equity. These mandates that are going to crush small businesses. Who knows what else? And they think that by handing out some federal grants here or there or unemployment benefits, that's going to solve the small business problem. It's not. That's failed left-wing Keynesian modern monetary theory, economic theories. Those are failed, disproven theories. And it's so disappointing to see such ignorance in our president, in our governor about how economics works. It's so disappointing. You know, I got an economics degree from this place. I'm not the smartest guy in the world on it, but I understand how the basics of economics work. These guys have no clue. Absolutely no clue how economics works. Both Biden and McKee are divisive. You're both I mean, you know, Biden with his, you know, America's dominated by white supremacists baloney. I mean, how can you be more divisive than that, than calling the largest portion of your citizenry? I think more than half of America is white, by insulting them, calling them white supremacists, every one of us, just because of this. Now, Dan McKee the other day insulted 200,000 Trump voters. Don't want any association with anybody supporting the big lie or anyone that associates with him. What big lie? You mean the big lie about Russia collusion? You mean the big lie about Ukraine impeachment? Well, they mean the big lie about elections. And that's still to be determined, folks. There's still a lot going on out there. You know, I haven't seen anything to prove it one way or the other, but I do know it's an open question. But again, it's the divisiveness of the whole thing. So, again, Dan McKee, Joe Biden, supposed to be Democrat moderates, but are there any moderates in the Democrat Party left? I don't know. All right, I want to bring our guest on, and as I bring on our guest, and before I say hello, I want to show you this. I want to share this with you. A few years ago, our center put out a report talking about public union excesses, the cost of collective bargaining in public sector unions in Rhode Island. Dennis Sheehan, a professor from Penn State, Justin Katz co-authored it. And the summary was this: that maybe up to, counting state and local, up to about $1.1 billion a year, our taxpayers paying extra because of abuses and excesses in collective bargaining contracts and state law. That means that about 25% of your local property taxes go towards these excesses. You have to pay something for teachers, for police, for fire, but you don't have to excessively pay beyond market rates. Your property taxes would be 25% less if we could rein in unions. Well, one way we didn't cover in that report, because we didn't know about it at the time, and it has only recently been discovered. And here to talk about that is Gayle Corrigan. Gayle, welcome in the Dugout.
Thank you.
I think this is your first appearance on In the Dugout, so I know you're being a great sport. What cap you got for me today?
I had to borrow one. I don't actually own a cap. So I borrowed Jeep.
Jeep. Hey, good American brand, right?
Great American brand.
Right.
And I thought Jeep is the brand of exploration, adventure, and it can take you off-roading, which is anytime you're dealing with such questions, you got to be a little tough.
Oh, I love the pair. I love it there. Okay, now you are an entrepreneur. You're a former East Greenwich town manager. You work for Judge Flanders in the Central Falls Receiver's Office. You've been a public servant. You're still a public servant because you're the district manager for the Central Coventry Fire District, but you also have your own entrepreneurial pursuits. This whole Warwick Union scandal where non-work time is counted as work time for the purposes of calculated when you reach overtime thresholds. This whole thing started in East Greenwich, and you, as town manager and then town council president Sue Sienke, basically uncovered this scandal. Is that correct?
Yes.
Tell us about how it happened.
So I was called in to actually as a consultant to look at the East Greenwich School Department, and they were having a deficit of over $1 million, and nobody could believe it. So we went in, we did our report, and it turned out that there was indeed a structural deficit in the East Greenwich School Department. But when they heard about it, they said, the school committee said, well, why don't you look under the hood of your town, of East Greenwich, the municipal? And of course, everybody would think that East Greenwich municipality, everything must be working fine. And so we were engaged to look at the municipal side. Several of the council members had some questions about why overtime was growing. And I took one look at their CBA that had just been negotiated.
Collective bargaining agreement. Yeah.
Collective bargaining agreement, yes. I took one look at it, and it took me about 30 seconds to tell you why there was a problem in East Greenwich. And it was because in this, it's very quiet. It was actually on the last page, and it was a footnote, and if you really weren't paying attention, you wouldn't really notice it. And if you didn't know what you were looking for, you wouldn't notice it. And what it did is it eliminated the floaters, and that existed at that time. And of course, I looked at the fire chief.
Floater being what? What's a floater quickly?
Yeah, I have the curse of knowledge. I know all this stuff. Yeah. So floater is, you have a minimum manning on a fire department. There should be, say, 8 people there, 8 firefighters. Of course, there's always sick time. There's always vacation time. People need,
so the floaters who are brought in off schedule, basically?
Yeah, so somebody goes out.
Okay, got it.
There's somebody there to come in and take their place, and there's no overtime.
So you notice there were no more floaters, just a lot of overtime being paid, I'm guessing, right? Yeah,
so of course, overtime would go through the roof. And I noticed a whole bunch of other things. And unfortunately, what had happened is it's a pure exposure of what was going on. So the council had been told by the fire chief and the finance director.
Who was the fire chief at the time?
Russell McGilvery.
Still there?
No, he's actually on the board of the Central Coventry Fire District.
Oh, you're still dealing with him. Okay, good. Okay.
And Kristen Benoit, who is now also on the board of the Central Coventry Fire District, so you know where this story's going. And I believe she's in West Warwick as the finance director. Well, they had told the council when they costed out this contract, this firefighter contract, that was only going to cost $140,000 for the 3 years, which is acceptable.
For what?
Just there's always increases in salaries.
The whole contract. Okay, yep.
The whole cost would be $140,000, which is reasonable. Unfortunately, they missed a few zeros, and the real cost of the contract.
Wow.
Surprise, surprise. I like to call it firefighter math. They missed a few zeros.
All right, let's get to the overtime. Our time's short.
It was $1.4 million. So once we exposed this problem, at that point, obviously, they had to get us gone. So in terms of getting, you talked about it before with Ken Block. In terms of what happened with East Greenwich, they had to get rid of us, and they did so.
All right, so yeah, and we did cover that you tried to expose this outrageous abuse of overtime.
We did
and
expose it.
They poured tons of money in and pretty much ousted the whole Republican town council in 2018. But let's go back and find out more. So once you discovered this overtime abuse, what actions did you take to try to correct it in East Greenwich? Just quickly, I want to get through some things very quickly here.
So unfortunately, there was not a lot we could do because this was a collective bargaining agreement that the council had. It was in the
collective bargaining agreement?
Yes, and it's a little bit different than what's happening in Warwick. But what happened there was getting rid of the floaters. But again, it was already embedded into the collective bargaining agreement.
But can you confirm, yes, that firefighters were using paid time off to count towards their work time for overtime calculation purposes?
Yes.
Okay, so that was happening.
Yes, so that was happening. And in fact, I remember reading a story that had been published in the Providence Journal at that time, and it was talking about Warwick. And I believe I called up, or Ken Block called me, and I said, I was kind of laughing. I'm like, oh, that's nothing. And by the way, I am a Warwick resident. I live in Warwick, so this is where I live. Oh, and I said, oh, that's nothing. You should see what's happening in East Greenwich. Yep. And he was able to actually quantify it and show it by shift. And he came to a council meeting and presented his findings. And like every other council meeting, when firefighters don't want to hear what you have to say, they shut you down. And
they stand up and yell and interrupt and all that?
Everything.
Now, when you had private meetings, was this the subject of the famous meeting between Sue Cienki and the fire chief when very loud words were spoken? Was this the subject of that meeting?
I wasn't at that meeting, but I don't believe so. I think by that time, I believe that what was really happening was what I call the big reveal. Because before then, everybody thought everything was fine. The firefighters had a friendly relationship, and the council really felt that they had been had because they had been lied to. They had been tricked, if you want to say, into signing something that was not right for them.
All right, so we only got about 5 minutes to cover a lot more ground. So what happened then? So you tried to take action. The union retaliated and put a lot of money into a local race, which you don't normally see, and they were successful. But at the state level, something else happened. The unions went crying to their friends in the General Assembly. In this case, it was Representative John Edwards from Tiverton. And as we've seen in so many cases, and as we discussed with Ken yesterday, when towns try to trim some of the excess fat that these unions are basically stealing from taxpayers and from the towns, they go running up to their friends in the General Assembly and they get a law passed to tie your hands and stop you from doing that. And isn't that where this clause that codified this overtime abuse became reality?
Yes, that started happening. I would say I was in Central Coventry at that time, and we protested very loudly, but without any avail. So I knew, obviously I've known since that bill was even proposed, I understood what that last sentence meant. Never mind going to the 42 hours, but I understood that basically firefighters were going to get 2.5 times, or being able to get 2.5 times what their salary was when they actually worked because of this sort of scheme. And I understood it perfectly. We fought it as much as we could, but of course it passed with no fiscal impact statement, nothing.
Yeah, and you were quoted in a story in the Hummel Report, who broke this along with Ken Block, saying these are unfunded mandates. Nobody is paying for them except for the taxpayers, and it's about to come home to roost. What do you mean come home to roost?
Well, it's going to start right now in Central Coventry. Central Coventry we're up for negotiations. We've been negotiating. It's very difficult because the taxpayers determine how much get paid, not the council or not the board. The board will present the budget, but the taxpayers have to approve it. Still a financial district meeting. And right now, as you know, Central Coventry had a very storied past in terms of a bankruptcy and excess overtime and other excesses. And while I would say that the firefighters in Central Coventry are below average in their pay, having these kind of legislative unfunded mandates placed on it, you're talking $300,000, $500,000, and
taxpayers are just getting ripped off, right?
Well, in this case, the taxpayers actually have to approve of being ripped off. So in this case, it's
do
going
they
to be
even
a
know what
little
they're
bit
approving?
more.
Right? They don't know
like,
what they're approving, though, right? Yeah. So
you can
all right.
you can trick a council. You can trick 7 people or 9 people or 5 people, but it's going to be hard to trick all the people in Coventry unless they think it's okay and they want to pay more. And if they do, that's their decision.
All right, let's move on to what's going to happen next. Joe Shikarchi, the Speaker of the House, seemed a little sympathetic. I don't believe it for a minute. The author of the bill, Jay Edwards, says, I'm surprised about that. I don't remember that language being in there. I mean, I like to find a politician who's going to support publicly, although I think they're out there, this overtime kind of abuse. There is a bill, House 6156, by Representative Patricia Morgan and Representative George Nardone, that would strike this clause in the firefighter contract that counts not working as working. What do you think the chances of that bill realistically moving are right now?
Well, as I said, I'm from Warwick, and today I found out that my representative, Evan Shanley, who voted for that bill, I found out that he's actually employed by the firefighters' legal representative. So he
So he works for the firm that represents the firefighters union.
Yes, it's a very small firm.
So they've got an inside man in the General Assembly.
Oh yes. And who knew? So in some ways,
there's more of the rigged system around here, right?
Yeah. In some ways, it's rigged. But I would really, and of course, Representative Sakachi is also from Warwick.
True.
True.
So there's some pressure being
and I'm in
levied,
Warwick,
right?
and Mayor Picozzi's my mayor. I very much supported him. So I think the thing is here is overcoming fear. And again, going back to the kind of the GPAT, remembering who we are and what we stand for, and overcoming the fear that this is the right thing to do. Because I'm not saying that overtime provision couldn't be bargained in like it is in Providence. They have a provision that's been codified like that. But he's going to leave it to each municipality and each fire district to do the right thing for their people.
Rather than tying everybody's hands. All right.
That's right.
We've got to end it there. I want to just give you, speaking of fear and that GPAT, you have been a target of the left for many, many years for having the courage to expose scandals and abuses with unions and other issues like this. But you have never backed down an inch. I have always, before I even knew you, I respected you for that. You stood for what you saw as a truth. You stood for the taxpayers. You took the arrows for freedom, and I commend you for that. And I thank you for being with us today on In the Dugout.
Thank you.
Gayle Corrigan, former town manager of East Greenwich, where this whole firefighter overtime abuse scandal was first exposed, which led to the law to protect firefighters. And as Ken Block said yesterday, we don't need just to expunge this abusive language at the statewide law in firefighters, but for all government union workers, because Ken Block was strongly hinting that in the coming days or weeks, they're going to be, he said even bigger, they're going to be exposing even bigger union overtime abuses with non-firefighter unions. So we'll stay tuned for that. I want to thank Gail. All right, let's move on. Let's switch gears, go back to COVID. And of course, we'll bring on our resident expert, and Dr. Andy Bostom. That's Bostom, not the city, an M at the end. Brown University credentialed epidemiologist, now a research scientist. Dr. Bostom, welcome back to In the Dugout. Oh, you are muted for some reason. We're not hearing you. You're not showing as muted, but we're not hearing you. Oh, now we got the Mickey Mouse voice, so I guess you're going to have to log out and log back in again. All right, so as he does that, I'll just say this. The problem with the government's response, and I basically said it from the first 2 weeks of this whole pandemic, counting cases and determining whether that makes an emergency was always the wrong way to go. We don't care about flu cases. We only care if they start killing people. So we should only have cared about COVID cases to the extent that they were killing people, and which people. And it didn't take long to figure out that it was pretty much just older people and people with pre-existing conditions for the most part. Flu sometimes kill healthy people. COVID sometimes kill healthy people, but we don't shut down the world for that. So everything you're seeing, what we hear from government officials, what we hear from left-wing advocates, what we hear from all the fear-mongers, they keep focusing on the spread of cases, which is, to me, and I think Dr. Bostom would agree, has always been an irrelevant factor. And we can't even count the actual cases. So many people had it, didn't even know they had it. So, Dr. Bostom, let's test the mic. Can you hear us?
Yeah, how we doing?
Now you're good. All right, so I don't know. I'm just going to give the floor to you. We had another COVID-19 Rhode Island Department of Health press conference with the governor, and I know once again you are hearing some things that just ruffle your feathers. Where do you want to start?
Well, I mean, first of all, I mean, the good news is that things are very flat in terms of hospitalizations. I mean, that's acknowledged even by the people that give the press conference from the governor on down. We're in a good position. There's lots of immunity in the population, both naturally acquired, which is very important, and vaccine induced. And so what we see is a complete flattening of cases, hospitalizations, and deaths. So the state should be wide open, Mike. I mean, it's not really even a debatable point now. The state should be wide open. The mask mandate should be lifted. We should be like Florida. There's no question about it.
I wasn't able to listen to the press conference just from an information point of view. That the governor, was he still sticking to what is May 27th, May 28th?
There was nothing new. So I assume that whatever nonsensical guidelines he gave before still hold.
All right, so I know one thing that particularly upset you was Director Alexander Scott saying that vaccines give you more protection than the natural immunity you would develop if you had recovered from the disease yourself. I think you told me she said that. I didn't hear it, but did I categorize that properly?
Oh, she was adamant about that, Mike.
Adamant.
She was insisting, in other words, as another one of these cudgels to beat people over the head to get vaccinated. You see, that's the heavy push now. And we'll get to the really dark side of that, which is imposing this upon younger and younger kids. But for the what do they call it? The vaccine hesitant? The way she's cajoling them this week is she's categorically stating that even if they've been infected, in other words, Mike, they should go for vaccination because that'll be superior. This is categorically false. You could say, well, maybe in certain cases, maybe you'll get a little bit of a boost, like a booster shot. Like every 10 years, your DPT shot. Mostly to prevent tetanus. you might require. But the immunity, I just sent you before, Mike. And I'll go through them really quickly. But this is, and there's a huge body of evidence. But I'm just going to go through some pre-publication and publication evidence. This is from a very respected AIDS research institute in Spain, which is internationally recognized. Highly functional SARS-CoV-2 spike and nucleocapsid protein T-cell responses in the absence of humoral responses against severe COVID.
But T-cell response is a natural response, right?
Yes, but this is the long-acting immunity, and so let me translate that into layman's English.
Yeah, good.
What they're saying is that both an important the spike protein, which is what the vaccines are producing en masse, and then another antigen, another surface protein on the virus, the nucleocapsid protein. Those trigger a specific what's called cell-mediated immunity, T-cell immunity. And what this paper is showing, and others have shown, is that you can be undetectable in terms of your antibody responses per se, and still have this very robust T-cell immunity. They were looking at so the antibodies levels can fluctuate, but the T-cell responses are very robust in people who you might not have even known were infected. Okay,
right,
so
there's no real way to measure how many people have that, right?
Well, there are now. I mean, you can, it's very expensive. Finally, T-cell assays have been commercialized. There's one company, if people are interested, called T-Detect, which has published, research papers, but now does it commercially. So that's in people who had very mild infections. And what we know, and I'll give you some other evidence, is that, for example, from SARS-CoV-1, studies published in 2020 showed that immunity persisted for 17 years. And right along that line of research from the very prestigious Gladstone Institute and University of California, San Francisco, they're finding that, again, mild COVID-19 infections confer what they call self-renewing T-cell immunity. It keeps getting sort of getting more robust over time, which, quote, may lead to SARS-CoV-2 specific memory T cells that can persist for up to 17 years and perhaps even longer.
All right, so let's boil it all down. So if you
well, wait, Mike. No, I want to go through this because when someone makes categorical statements
well, you
like
can keep going, but I
want to keep going. I want to keep going.
All right, you're going to keep going. I'm just going to summarize in English for our viewers every now and then. Okay. So the premise here is that the Department of Health stating today,
the head of the Department of Health,
stating today that even if you've had the infection and recovered, that natural immune response is less potent than the vaccine response, and you're saying the data absolutely does not support that.
Absolutely. Okay, so here's another study which is very clinically oriented. This is from what's called the COVID SER Academic Study Group from Lyon, France. It's a consortium of academic teaching centers in the Lyon, France area. Okay, so they took convalescent serum. They took serum plasma from people, what they specifically, quote, mildly COVID-19 infected healthcare workers, as well as critically ill patients. And what they found when they tested this against live virus in what are called neutralization studies, that they demonstrated more robust immunity against the variants of concern than serum from the uninfected. And what they found was that the reduced neutralizing response observed towards the South African variant. Remember, everyone was terrorized about that for a while. In fully immunized subjects with the Pfizer vaccine is a striking finding of this study. The reduced neutralizing response, let me read that again, observed towards the South African variant in fully immunized subjects with the Pfizer mRNA vaccine is a striking finding of this study. In other words, Mike, the people that recovered from infections, whether they were mild infections in the case of the healthcare workers or severe infections that wind up having patients ICU hospitalized, their immunity tested in a cell system just from their whole serum plasma was more robust than serum tested from people that had been fully vaccinated.
All right.
Okay,
So,
at Mount Sinai research.
all right. We got enough. We got to move on. That's all right. So I want to bring it into practical, what this means practically for people now.
Well, also, Mike, I want to say there's a negative side potentially too, because it's not just a question of she's exaggerating the benefit. Remember, the flip side is she's cajoling people who've been infected to go get vaccinated.
Right.
And there's a study from Mount Sinai researchers in New York that shows that the second vaccine dose results, quote, in a reduction of cellular immunity in COVID-19 recovered individuals, which suggests, quote, may not be necessary in individuals previously infected with SARS-CoV-2. So, this is just too much.
So if you've recovered if you were infected and you recovered and
That's right.
you developed natural immunity, the second vaccine shot actually reduces your immunity?
In this study by Mount Sinai researchers,
so it raises a question.
It raises a question.
All right. So the point being, this indiscriminate push for everybody to get vaccinated, whether you've recovered from the virus or not, whether you're a 16 or 17-year-old, as we discussed in the last few weeks, or whether you're a 12 to 15-year-old, as we're going to discuss.
Well, now down to 6 months old. They're driving. They're going down to 6 months old. That's their target.
So this indiscriminate push is not supported by the data and could actually have negative results, is what you're saying. Could, right?
Well, yeah. I mean, but certainly the weight of the evidence is that what she told today was in the Soviet Union, you'd call it desinformation. In other words, she's using to get people to get vaccinated for whatever her reasons are. And I'm sorry, what she gave out today was desinformation, and there's no way around it anymore, Mike. This is outrageous.
And it's not just her. The CDC.
No, the pediatricians.
Oh yeah, we'll get to them in a second. But the CDC's been giving out misinformation. We now learn about the spread of the virus outdoors.
Outdoors.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean we now know that they've been lying for the better part of the year.
Look, Mike, we can get to masking. I mean, they gave out information about masking.
What do you think of that ruling today?
I only have seen like headlines about it. Big whoop. I mean, you didn't know that before. I mean, who? No, really. I mean, I would say if you've recovered from an infection, and then it just ignores the issue that masks don't do anything anyway. I mean, really. I mean, it's just the disinformation and the layers of untruth just start to pile on top of each other after a while. Can I talk about the pediatricians? It was very
hold on one second. I'm going to get there. I just want to set it up with a couple other things first for our audience. So again, I want to make sure everything fits in a proper silo. So again, this indiscriminate vaccination push on everybody, right? We know that there are, according to here's a study that's showing. Hold on, Doc. We'll get to you in just. I just want to get this information out.
Sure.
2 million U.S. college students will be facing a vaccine mandate, a vaccine passport, if you would. Now we know they're pushing it down.
Well, Mike, I missed that headline. Mike, did that headline say immune or not?
Yes, immune or not.
And I don't know the story. So did the story? You must have looked at it. Did the story go into when they say immune or not? Immune meaning they may have had an infection?
Yes. So they're saying the same thing that Dr. Scott's saying, that hey, we don't care if you've got natural immunity. You need to get the vaccine in order to come to college.
Okay.
I mean, now we're talking 12 to 15-year-olds. Again, I'm sharing images here. Now you have, as we saw today, pediatricians,
right?
Obviously, cronies. Obviously, drank the Kool-Aid up there. We heard
one's
on the radio.
One was involved in the clinical trial. It's the older gentleman, whatever. Look, so you get from the first presenter, the younger woman pediatrician, dire warnings about pediatric COVID severity. Okay, do you have any of the materials I sent you, Mike? Can we go through some of this?
Yes.
I want to show, first of all, the thing that I discovered today from the CDC. That's it. This is the state of Rhode Island, Mike. You know, Matt Allen has been asking for this. We've been asking for this. Yesterday, the CDC published it since the Department of Health won't give it up. You see, the Department of Health can't really screw around with the CDC. If the CDC demands data, they have to give it to them. Well, look at that zero there. There are zero COVID deaths, basically, in the pediatric population in Rhode Island. And it's not unusual. There's about 10 other states that have had this. Because it is, contrary to what the pediatricians were saying today, it is a mercifully benign disease in children. In fact, Mike,
but yet these pediatricians were saying how terrible it was, right? To kids.
Yes, I didn't have a chance to send you this. I went through the Department of Health archive and I dug out a document which I send you from the swine flu pandemic, which was legitimate concern to children. It turned out that older generations had residual immunity from previous waves of flu infections, and they did very well with it. Kids didn't do that well with it. There were 3 deaths in Rhode Island. 3 deaths in Rhode Island during the 2009-2010 swine flu pandemic. 0 in this state. Do you have the slide on comparing the flu years that I sent?
This one?
Yeah, that's it. So look at that swine flu year compared now to the COVID deaths. And let me explain the 287 and the 187 that you see up there. The 287 is the raw number as of yesterday. The 187 is because the CDC itself did an audit of death certificates which they had included in that 287 number and found out they had to get rid of 35% of them.
So what does that mean? That we've been overstating deaths by 35% for the whole last 15 months?
In this age group, that's what it meant. So in other words, they reviewed all the deaths through the end of 2020.
In this age group, okay. In
0 to 17. But if anything, flu deaths are notoriously undercounted. That has been the history. Look at the comparison. You've got a baseline comparison to COVID of 187 deaths, and then we're now over a year. And pandemic flu, 1,220. A bad flu year in 2012 to 13, 1,161. A bad one in 2014 to 15, 803. The most recent year where we have full decent flu data was 2019 to 20, and there were 434 deaths. I mean, Mike, this is just...
So the bottom line is, in 0 to 17 age kids, exactly the clientele that these pediatricians supposedly are doctors for, who are their clients, the COVID virus is far less deadly in this age group than pretty much every other past major flu.
Mike, this is the slide. These are the data. This is the CDC data. Why don't these, frankly, disingenuous people show this slide? Why don't they show it?
Well, why doesn't the media ask about it? You know, that's the bigger question.
Well, the reporters are brain dead. Let's face it. They really, these are not interested, intelligent, certainly intrepid people. So let's forget about them. But why don't the pediatricians say, on the other hand, you know how you make an argument on the one hand, on the other hand. So the other thing that the first pediatrician talked about was how, quote, benign the spike protein is. Now remember, the spike protein is what we're getting in long amounts, whether it's through the mRNA vaccines or the adenovirus vaccines, which may produce even more because they're literally, in the genetic machinery to go on producing the spike protein. There are basic science reports now where laboratories are investigating the spike protein. God only knows why this wasn't done a lot more earlier. And some that are, a little dated, but, were sort of obscure literature. But now the spike protein, for example, is believed to be potentially thrombogenic. Well,
thrombogenic means what? What's that mean?
These clots, including these
Okay.
unusual clots that are showing up. By the way, Mike, we have a young woman in the state of Rhode Island. All we know is the report that was filed into the vaccine adverse event reporting system. 20-year-old, otherwise healthy young woman. Yes, she was on an oral contraceptive, whether it was for her menses or for birth control. She had 2 pulmonary emboli. Now, that's a potentially catastrophic outcome. It can kill the young. There was a 16-year-old high school, and that was from an mRNA vaccine. There was a 16-year-old high school student, I believe it was in Michigan, perfectly healthy, also on oral contraceptives. She took an mRNA vaccine. She had what's called a saddle pulmonary embolus, where it's so large that it really blocks the orifice where you branch off into the 2 arteries. She did die.
All right, so again, the calculation for parents, if you're going to have really informed consent and understand the risks and the pros and cons of whether or not your child should get a vaccine, is that in Rhode Island, we've never had a death from COVID in the 0 to 17 age group. And even
it's a long time too, Mike. I mean, this is going back to January 2020.
Yep, more than a year, yep. And nationally, deaths in this age group are significantly less than in other just common flus. All right.
Let me give you the other side, Mike. They talk about hospitalizations. It's very striking how these discussions are really directed and I would say in a very misleading way. No mention at all about those important data. That's the ultimate bottom line is mortality.
Well, they just mentioned how anecdotally we've seen severe cases.
No, but those are hospitalizations. But recall, Mike, you can't compare COVID hospitalizations to influenza hospitalizations. Influenza hospitalizations have been based on a clinical syndrome that's an influenza syndrome and then maybe a positive test after the fact. This puts the cart before the horse. And anyone who tests positive for COVID, even if they come in for trauma, is considered a COVID hospital admission.
Yeah,
that's why I think
yeah.
Comparing hospitalization data are useless. You have to look at deaths. And so I just think that when you get presentations like this and they're high pressure, remember,
and again, with no data to back it up.
It starts off with Dr. Scott really dissimulating. I mean, that was just untrue what she said. It's certainly, you can't make a statement like that. You could say, we don't know for sure. Here's evidence which suggests that maybe you get a little boost, but here's evidence that you have a very robust immune response from just being infected. She doesn't do anything like that. She's adamant that you have to get vaccinated even if you've been infected.
One side of the story, no pros and cons,
Absolutely.
No information so that parents can make proper consent.
Even the clinical trial, which granted
one side, right?
Mike, even the clinical trial which granted the EUA approval this week for for the vaccine.
Hold that thought 1 second. I want you to comment on that. Plus this question we got from somebody earlier in an email today. So apparently it was discussed at the press conference that the Pfizer clinical trial for the 12 to 16-year-olds included 1,100 vaccine recipients. The other 1,100 got a placebo. Is that a significant enough trial sign? And is that all they base it on? So go ahead and talk about the clinical trial.
So let me talk about So the question is let me see if I can answer the question by just presenting what actually happened. So it looks like what there were 2 groups, the vaccine placebo group, just about 1,130 in each group. In the placebo group, there were 16 infections. Actually, they were mild infections because, Mike, there were 0 hospitalizations, let alone any deaths. 0 hospitalizations in the whole study. In the vaccinated group, again, they didn't have any infections, but they had quote 5 serious adverse events. Okay, so when you look at the benefit of something, you refer to something called the number needed to treat. When you look at the downside, it's called the number needed to harm. So this is a very interesting story too, because the placebo group, we were first told not that long ago, 2 days ago. Yesterday, the story changed. The placebo group, we were initially told, had one adverse event. So 5 in the treated group, 1 in the placebo.
Right, I remember hearing that, yep.
Right. And the percentage difference, remember the denominators are about 1130, was 0.3%. Now that sounds small, but what that tells you at the time is that if you would have an adverse event for every 333 people, in this case kids, that you vaccinated. Well, my God, the number needed to treat to prevent one death could be an enormous number. We know that from Israel, and that's in 16 and above, so there's some high-risk people, obviously, by the time you get to 60, 65, 70 and above, that entire population, the number needed to treat to prevent one death during about a 6-week follow-up period was 28,000. It's got to be 2, 3, 4, 5 times that number for
Right.
12. So what you do, just use the 28,000. You take the 28,000 and you divide it by 333, you would get 84 adverse events for one potential death. So then they come back, and yesterday we're told during the
Yeah, they
slide
don't
list-
seem to be worried about hospitalizations because of the vaccine. They're only worried about the hospitalizations that really don't exist
Well,
because of the COVID, right? I mean, again, it's a one-sided story, right?
Well, so in the course of 24 hours, someone must have picked up on this. They come back, and the presentation yesterday for the committee, which gave ultimate approval, the vaccine committee, through CDC. All of a sudden, another adverse event appears in the placebo group. So now you're down to a difference of 3, and the percentages are 0.4 versus 0.2. But even with a 0.2% difference, it's okay. So for every 500 people you vaccinate, you'd experience a severe adverse event. And what that tells you is, again, using the Israeli numbers, which are very generous to the 12 to 15-year-old age group because they weren't even studied, but if you said that, you would have 56 instead of 84. You would have 56 severe adverse events for each potential life you saved. And I think the equation is much worse than that, Mike, because look, we have an entire state for since at least January, February of 2020, where there hasn't been a single pediatric death. Most of that period of time, well, all that period of time for most kids, there's been no vaccine available.
Right.
I mean, but
now,
Mike, this is the
Now
problem.
it gets worse. Now it gets worse. Let me show you. Let's show everybody this. So this is an email that was forwarded to me from a parent who has a child in the Charahoe school system down in South County. So now they're already starting these clinics for 12 to 15-year-olds. Yes, they're asking for parental consent, which is required.
Right.
But here's the line that just alarmed me. I don't know if you could read this on your screen, but
Yeah, I can see if a child refuses to get a vaccination, they will not be forced.
That to me is bullying, is coercion.
Right.
Is they're trying to bully the parents that if your kid doesn't get a vaccine, well, we don't force them, but we might give them a hell of a lot of shite or something.
No, but
I mean, that is an
highlight the next line.
unbelievable statement to me. What does that say to you?
Well, it's a bad enough statement that what comes after is not much better. Then they're going to be told to refer to their pediatrician so the pediatrician can convince them.
Well, but at least they're getting, I mean,
Well,
that's all we really say is talk to your
But who are the
doctor, right?
pediatricians going to go to? The run-of-the-mill pediatrician's going to go to.
Well, I know.
To get their advice, they're going to go to the two folks that were on at the hearing today, giving you happy talk about how beneficial the vaccine is, terrorizing you about pediatric COVID, and not reporting anything about the serious adverse events, about the benign nature of COVID, about the fact that in our state, that's where these kids live, that's where their parents live, zero deaths. And as recently as a pandemic that did affect kids, because you could see, Mike, the national comparison as well as the local comparison. We're a tiny state. But with over 1,200 deaths nationally and 3 deaths in our state versus 0 for COVID-19, this information has to be presented to parents, and And look, we're not even dealing, Mike, with the issue that these are young, growing kids now that we're talking about. And we have absolutely...
And we have no idea the long-term impact.
No one knows anything. And if anyone says they do, they're just being dishonest. And another canard is that, well, these vaccines have been in development for 10 years. You'll hear certain radio talk show hosts in Rhode Island say that. That's baloney. That's baloney. They're talking about the basic research, which, can we synthesize a compound? Do we have a delivery system? Does it not kill animals? That's not the same thing as we're doing the experiment in real time right now. This is the experiment.
All right, Dr. Bostom, once again, great information. Listen, we hope anyone watching will refer to the show, refer to the data. You can come back, email us, info@rifreedom.org if you'd like any of these charts or data sent to you. Andy Bostom, your wealth of knowledge, thank you so much for joining us.
Mike, just one last thing. I would say to parents that concerned, because there's been so many asymptomatic infections. If you want some assurance that you're not, you're failing to vaccinate a kid who's now vulnerable to this. Whatever I might think about its true nature in children. Again, unless you have a kid with cystic fibrosis or something, that's a whole different story. But test your kids.
About healthy kids, yeah.
Test your kids for antibodies and T cells. Make the investment. The T cell test is more expensive, but make the investment in your kid. I think it's going to cost you probably $100 to $150 for the T cell test, but it's called T-Detect. I would absolutely recommend that so that you can have some comfort that, maybe my kid was exposed and does have some immunity, and actually present that to people that are going to start, demanding vaccination status.
All right. Dr. Bostom, thank you as always.
Take care, Mike.
Joining us. Yeah, we'll see you next week. So, folks, do you see what's going on here? First of all, until they present the data to support what they were saying, what Dr. Scott said today, what those pediatricians said today, Dr. Bostom just gave you the data, the actual CDC data, and he's been giving us data for months on this show to directly refute the claims they're making about vaccines and the virus. They are exaggerating and distorting the potential effect of the virus itself on pediatric age kids. Definitely distorting and exaggerating that. While at the same time, they are basically saying there is no risk to the vaccine. And that's a distortion. That's a lie. There's low risk. Very low risk, but there's still risk. And it's risk that you as a parent need to be aware of. And then you see the second problem, which is related to the first. And I can't remember the phrase, the Russian communist phrase that the doctor used, disinformation or whatever the heck it was. But they control the information. And just like the doctor said, just like Dr. Bostom said, even if you as a parent or other parents go to their pediatrician, the only thing they know is what the Department of Health is telling them. And if the Department of Health is giving them bad information or distorted information, then they're going to make distorted decisions on behalf of their patients. I mean, this again, we in America and what we believe, you should be free, I should be free, you as parents should be free to make the choices you want for yourselves and your children. And you should have all the information, the honest information, the truthful information, the real information, not the fake information at your fingertips in order to make that critical decision. I'm not advising you to have your kids get a vaccine or not get a vaccine. What we're telling you, there's another side to the story than what the Rhode Island Department of Health and often even the CDC is telling you. And Dr. Bostom just gave you some great advice. Perhaps you even want to, before you consider a vaccine for your child, why don't you go get them tested for natural immunity, which Dr. Bostom has showed the stats, claims that it's stronger than the vaccine immunity. So, it's hard to understand why these common, traditional, accepted, successful medical procedures of informed consent, of consulting your doctor, of doctors being properly informed themselves, we have eschewed all of that. We've thrown it in the toilet. Why? Why the rush? I don't get it. Why the rush? Somebody, was it Louise? Somebody here on the YouTube today said, is the state getting a kickback for every vaccine? We know they got kickbacks on the HPV, human papilloma virus vaccine. We know they got kickbacks on that from, I forget, the big drug company. I can't remember which one it was. But this is, all these vaccines have been paid for federally. So I can't imagine that, maybe there is a kickback. I don't know. I guess the more that the federal government buys, and if the state can be their sales reps, I guess, then they'll give commissions. I don't know. I'm not suggesting that, but I'm just saying that's. But why this mad push, this indiscriminate push? And then, as we covered today, these overtime abuses with public unions, again, whatever they can to deceive and rip off taxpayers. In the case of COVID, it's for some special agenda. In the case of the unions, it's for some special interest group to enrich themselves, to advance their agenda. And it's always at our expense. Medically, financially, at our expense, potentially. Our risk, anyway. Very disturbing where our nation, and then I started the show by comparing Joe Biden to Jimmy Carter and Joe Biden to Dan McKee, and how disappointing it is that these supposed moderates are literally governing like far left progressive socialists. They really are, even though they claim they're not. So, disturbing state of affairs in our state, nationally, with our Department of Health. You're going to get the truth here from Dr. Bostom, from me on economics. We haven't covered topics like education and school choice. We will. Stay with us. We thank you for watching today and in the Dugout, and hope you have a good weekend. We'll see you next Tuesday. Stenhouse out.